So in the last lesson, we added our validation message, but we're not actually indicating that the form input itself is invalid. So I'd like to just take a quick lesson and teach you some styling. So for this, we could go down into our styles and we could start supplying some styles based on the class names that Angular is adding for us. So here we have a class of input, which is what we've added. And we also have ng-dirty, ng-touched, ng-invalid. If we go and hit refresh, we can then see that they are untouched, pristine, and invalid. So what we want to essentially do is tie in our inputs with some styles that's going to enable us to see that they are invalid if the user has incorrectly filled them out. First off, it might be tempting to do something like this, where we say ng-invalid, and all we're going to do is supply a background. For this, we're going to use the hex code of FFE7E7, and then simply change the border color across to our nice E66262. So when we then save this out, we're going to see something like this, which I don't really think is what our intention was going to be. Now, why is the entire thing red? First off, I mentioned to you that this ng form has its own validation state. So you can see that the form is untouched, pristine, but it's invalid. If we then click and blur, we then see our error message. If we add a few characters to take that away, our error message goes away, but our entire form is still invalid. So how do we approach this? Now, it might be that we do something like this. So we could say form and then add a space and then say ng-invalid. So this actually takes care of quite a lot of things. We could also chain the selectors. We could say input.ng-invalid, but now you can see that our select has been left out and our text area has been left out. So from my perspective, if we do form and then a space, this is then looking at any child elements or components that contain this ng-invalid inside of the form. If we were to add it to the form itself and chain that selector, we're only going to see those ng-invalid class states being applied to the form itself. So this is a nice catch-all in the way that we can specify those invalid classes. However, we now have a problem that we land on the page and everything is red. So what could we do? In the same way that we have ng-invalid, if we jump up to our first error message, we also have this touched alongside the invalid. So what about we use this? Now to add it to the same class, so this style will only get painted if our element contains both ng-invalid and ng-touched at the same time. So now when we hit save, we then see absolutely nothing. We can click, blur, and we get a perfectly timed error message. Our ng if above is then kicking into effect, displaying our error message. And also our ng-touched styles are being painted as well. Now this approach is great. However, let's assume that we have another form. We're then going to end up with a problem of having to declare our styles again. So what I'm going to suggest is you move this to our styles.css, where we can jump down into our inputs. We've got some button styles which we'll use, but we could add a comment and just say Angular related styles and then paste in our selectors. This will then allow us to apply those styles throughout the application. So when we save things out, our application has been refreshed. And if we were to then inspect element, we'll then see that those styles are in fact coming from our styles.sass. So this is 2 lines of code, which is then going to be available throughout our entire application. It doesn't matter what view, page, route we're on. We can just rely on Angular to just add those classes for us, and our styling is then taken care of. So I think this worked out quite nicely. We've added some catch-all styling to all of our fields. At the moment, we don't have any validation for our radios, but we can leave this for another time. So with this in mind, let's carry on building out our form. We're yet to hook up some submit events, and I'll talk you through some great practices that we can enhance the user experience and give them feedback if they were to click refresh. And also we'll learn how to disable the submit buttons if the form is invalid too.